At 12 years old, our father abandoned us in an airport. 15 years later, I infiltrated his perfect life and took everything back. I still remember the sound the ticket made when it hit the bottom of the trash can. I remember how loud it seemed in the middle of that crowded terminal, surrounded by people rushing to catch their flights, none of them noticing the moment my father erased us from his life. I was 13. My little brother Mason had just turned 8. He was clutching the game sphere we'd begged Mom for the Christmas before, still wearing the hoodie she packed in his bag, the one with the dinosaur on the front. That morning, we had no idea our lives were about to split down the middle like a fault line. It had been a year since our parents divorced. Mom had primary custody, but every other weekend we were supposed to stay with our dad. That weekend, she had to fly to Memphis for her cousin's funeral, so we were scheduled to spend 3 days with him. She dropped us off Friday morning in the driveway of his apartment complex with the usual warnings. Be good. Listen to your dad. Call me if anything feels off. She always said that last one. She'd never stopped being afraid of him, even after the papers were signed. When Dad came outside to get us, he was wearing a new shirt that still had the fold lines in the fabric, like it had just come out of a box. His smile didn't reach his eyes. I noticed that immediately. He was checking his watch every few seconds, tapping his keys against his thigh, barely looking at us as we climbed into the back seat of his brand new Volvo. The last time we'd seen him, he was still driving his old beat-up pickup, the one Mason loved because of the loose seatbelt that made us bounce. Now he acted like we'd scratched the leather. His new wife, Lana, was waiting at the apartment, standing at the door like a hostess at a party she didn't want to throw. She was dressed like she was heading to a beach shoot. Big glasses, glossy lips, sandals she couldn't walk in. Her sons, Trent and Bryce, were already dragging suitcases into the hallway. Dad told us we were all going on a surprise trip to Houston. Said it like he was giving us a gift. Mason's eyes lit up. He asked if there was going to be a pool. No one answered. In the car, the air felt like it was pressing down on us. Lana was in the passenger seat, whispering something to Dad. Trent kept kicking the back of Mason's seat. Bryce was taking selfies. I looked at my dad in the rearview mirror. He was staring at us the way someone looks at a receipt they don't remember signing. Mason didn't notice. He was lost in his game, the beeping sounds muffled under his headphones. At the airport, everything moved too quickly. We went through security without speaking. Dad handed the agent our documents like they were business papers he didn't care about. I remember the way he kept glancing toward the departure board, like he couldn't wait to be gone. The terminal was buzzing with announcements, kids crying, people rushing by with suitcases. But we moved slowly, like something was pulling us back without us knowing it yet. We sat in those hard plastic chairs near the gate for less than 5 minutes before Dad stood up without warning. He grabbed both our backpacks and told us to follow him. We did, of course. He was still our dad. I hadn't yet learned that some people don't deserve that title. He marched us over to a security desk and pushed us toward a guard. I thought he was going to ask about a delay or a gate change. Instead, he pointed at us like we were strangers. He said we were abandoned, that our mother had left us at the airport, that he found us wandering alone. I started to speak, confused and embarrassed, but he cut me off before I could say a word. I watched him pull our tickets from his jacket and drop them in the trash. Right there. No hesitation. Like he was throwing away receipts for a meal he didn't like. Then he turned to us and said, loud enough for everyone around to hear, I'm flying to Houston with my real family. You two can find your own way home. Mason didn't understand. He reached for Dad's hand like he always did when he got scared. Dad shoved him so hard, he fell backwards onto the tile floor. His game sphere hit the ground and slid under a row of chairs. Lana walked up behind him, bent down, picked it up, and turned to Bryce with a smirk. Here, she said. My boys deserve nice things. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I felt like my brain had stopped working. I just stood there watching Bryce take it and laugh. Then Dad pulled something from his wallet. A photo. It was a picture from a summer vacation, before the divorce, before things got ugly. Mom, Dad, me, Mason, all 4 of us smiling at some lake cabin we used to rent every August. He looked at the photo like it was poison, tore it down the middle, then again and again until the pieces fell like confetti onto the airport floor. He turned to me and said, You were both mistakes. They're athletes. You're nothing but problems. Mason started crying. Not loud sobs, but the kind of tears that come out of your entire body. The kind where your whole face collapses. Dad bent down, cupped Mason's cheek, and for a second I thought he was going to comfort him. Instead, he slapped him. Not hard enough to leave a bruise, but enough to make the whole terminal go quiet for a second. Enough for people to stop and stare. The second security guard was already walking over when Dad backed away. He waved his hands like he was washing them clean. "Check DNA if you want," he said. "They're not mine. Not anymore." Then he turned and walked back toward Lana, who was already boarding. The four of them disappeared through the gate. First class. Of course. That's where all his money had gone when Mom asked why the child support checks were bouncing. We were taken to some office in the airport. I remember the carpet was gray and the lights were too bright. Mason fell asleep on my shoulder while we waited. He didn't say a word. I don't think he understood. I barely did. The CPS worker showed up after a few hours and asked a million questions. Our mom's phone was off because she was in the air. We ended up spending the weekend in a foster home in North Kansas City. I lied and told Mason it was like a sleepover. He didn't believe me. When Mom got back, she was screaming before the car door even closed. She was half out of her mind. Couldn't believe it. Couldn't breathe. She tried to press charges, but we didn't have money for a good lawyer. Dad had already vanished by then, moved south with Lana and her kids, changed his number, closed his accounts, left nothing behind but a trail of unpaid bills and silence. It started like any other Tuesday, except for the part where I found the man who destroyed my childhood smiling on a corporate homepage. I was checking a client's partner list when my cursor hovered over a face I hadn't seen in 15 years. Greg. Same smug smile. Same narrow eyes. A little grayer, maybe richer, but still the same man who left me and my brother Mason in an airport terminal like we were expired coupons. He was listed as Chief Strategy Officer for a firm in Austin called Stonebridge Axis, some private finance group managing the portfolios of politicians, celebrities, and old money families. His bio was full of lies about leadership and family values, all while Mason and I had scraped our way through ramen dinners and overdue rent. I couldn't stop staring. Part of me wanted it to be a mistake, but it wasn't. It was him. I found more. LinkedIn, Facebook, photos of him with Lana at fundraisers and yacht parties. Their sons, Trent and Bryce, both now in their 20s, worked for him. They all posed like royalty, arms around each other, the real family he chose. Then I saw a Father's Day post that punched me in the chest. Greg had written that raising his two wonderful sons had been the joy of his life. Like Mason and I never existed. I showed it to Mason. He didn't even finish reading it before the panic attack hit. He dropped my phone and sank to the floor, gasping for air. I held him, trying to keep him grounded, but all he kept saying was, "Why weren't we enough?" I didn't sleep that night. My mind replayed the airport over and over. The slap, the ripped photo, the lies. And I made a decision. Greg thought we were gone. He thought he won. He was wrong. I spent a week gathering information. I learned what time he got his overpriced espresso each morning, 7:45, at a cafe where everyone wore tailored jackets and fake smiles. I tracked his gym, his weekend golf games, even what car he drove. Everything. Then I found out his company was hiring in cybersecurity. The timing was perfect. I rewrote my resume under my middle name, Eli, and used Mom's maiden name. Everything on it was true, but not traceable to my real identity. I sent it in. 3 days later, I got an interview. Walking into that office building felt like walking into a lie wrapped in glass and steel. I wore a second-hand suit and carried a borrowed laptop bag. They asked the usual questions: protocols, breach response, server security. I kept my voice even and my answers simple. The first interview went fine. The second one changed everything. Greg walked into the room, extended his hand, and introduced himself like I hadn't been the kid he shoved away from a terminal gate. I shook it without flinching. He looked into my eyes for a second too long. "You look familiar," he said. I smiled politely and said nothing. He asked about loyalty and company values like he hadn't burned his own family to the ground. I told him I believed in protecting what mattered. I got the job. The first weeks were quiet. I studied everything: their systems, their protocols, their clients. I made myself invisible but indispensable. When someone attempted to breach their network, I shut it down in minutes. I was the hero. Greg started calling me into meetings, told people I was brilliant. I played along. That's when I saw the truth behind the curtain. The company was shady. They moved money through loopholes so narrow they were practically criminal. They pushed risky investments onto clients, all for internal profit. Greg played the ethical family man by day and manipulated the books by night. His sons were worse. Trent handled clients, but knew nothing about finance. He spent his hours bragging about watch brands and telling assistants to smile more. Bryce was quieter, less obnoxious, but still lived like the world owed him something. Then one day, I passed the executive lounge and heard Bryce laughing about his collection of vintage handhelds. He held up a game sphere. It looked exactly like the one Dad took from Mason. I stopped breathing. He said his stepmom gave it to him when he was a kid. I turned and walked out before I did something I'd regret. That night, I sat at my desk and created a trail. Not obvious, just enough to look suspicious. Search queries, odd logins, questionable emails, all pointing to Trent. Then I waited. A week later, the board launched a quiet audit. Greg panicked. He called me in and asked if I could look into it discreetly. I nodded. He said he trusted me. The irony nearly made me laugh. He thought I was protecting him. In truth, I was the one setting the fire under his feet. And he had no idea the match was already lit. The closer I got to Greg, the more I realized he was starting to unravel. At work, he was still putting on the same polished act, but behind the curtain, he was losing his grip. His tone was sharper. His smiles were thinner. He was calling emergency meetings with the board, whispering behind closed doors with his legal team, and pacing the hallways like a man expecting ghosts. I knew exactly which ghost he was afraid of. Trent, meanwhile, had no idea he was walking into a trap. He started panicking after getting word that his company laptop was flagged in the investigation. He asked me one morning if I'd take a quick look at his files before the IT auditors showed up. I said I'd try. He promised something in return. That something turned out to be an invite to a client cocktail party on a private rooftop. I accepted. The party was filled with men who smelled like money and women who looked like magazine covers. Greg was working the room like a campaign trail, pretending nothing was falling apart under his feet. Lana stood near the bar in a red dress that was trying too hard, sipping champagne and scanning for cameras. I hovered near the edge, invisible by design, until I noticed something strange. Bryce wasn't drinking. He was standing near a group of interns, but not talking, just watching. And when his eyes met mine across the room, I swear, something shifted. He looked at me like he knew something he wasn't supposed to. After the party, I stayed behind. Not to clean up, just to look. I slipped into Greg's office and took photos of his handwritten notes from a meeting with overseas clients. The language was coded, but the message was clear. He was siphoning money through shell accounts in the Caribbean, hiding assets and names that didn't exist on paper. I traced one of the accounts to a vendor that billed the company monthly for consulting services. There was no consultant, just a bank in Bermuda and a number that matched Greg's initials. The next day, Bryce stopped by my desk. He didn't say much, just leaned on the cubicle and asked, "You're not from around here, are you?" I gave a half laugh and told him I moved around a lot. He stared for a second too long, nodded, and walked off without another word. Something about the way he asked it made my stomach tighten. That same afternoon, I got a message from one of the junior analysts asking if I'd be willing to backdate a software patch in the logs to make it look like it had been installed earlier. Nothing major, he claimed, just to cover a missed report. I told him no, but saved the message. I had a feeling I'd need it. Then came the charity golf event. A big showy weekend where all the executives brought their spouses, their kids, their fake laughs. I didn't want to go, but attendance was mandatory. I rented the cheapest set of clubs I could find, threw on a borrowed polo shirt, and drove to a country club where valet attendants judged me for breathing the same air. Greg greeted me like I was his protege. Bryce gave me a look I couldn't read. Trent shook my hand like he was testing my grip. We got paired up by groups. Greg played with Bryce and 2 clients. I got Trent, a board member, and some guy who kept calling me kid. By the 3rd hole, Trent was already half drunk and making snide comments about my swing. By the 5th, he was complaining about the investigation and how some loser in IT was probably trying to frame him. I told him not to worry, that whoever did it would be caught eventually. He laughed and said, "I'm not worried. My dad always fixes things." At lunch, I overheard Greg bragging about his legacy. He told a client that his first marriage was a false start, that he was man enough to course correct. I gripped my fork so tight my knuckles turned white. He said Lana saved his life, that his boys gave him purpose. Then he said, and I remember this word for word, "My past doesn't exist anymore. I built this life from scratch." Later that afternoon, he pulled me aside by the golf carts. He looked tired, older than usual. He asked me again if we'd met before. I shook my head. Then he said something I wasn't ready for. "There's something in your eyes that I remember," he told me. Something I thought I buried a long time ago. I forced a laugh and told him maybe he just owed me a raise. That night, I went home and replayed every word, every pause, every glance. He was starting to remember. He didn't know how, but somewhere in his gut, he knew who I was. That changed the timeline. I had to accelerate everything. I encrypted the files I'd collected, emails, contracts, offshore transfers, payment trails. I copied them to a secure drive, labeled it as a system patch, and placed it on the server backup Greg's office used for board presentations. All I needed was the right person to open it. But just when I thought I had control, Mason called. He told me our grandmother had fallen and broken her hip. She needed surgery. Insurance wouldn't cover everything. He didn't say it, but I knew what he meant. We were out of money. I told him I'd handle it. And I meant it. No matter what happened with Greg, I was going to make sure Mason didn't carry any more weight than he already had. The next morning, I walked into the office and found chaos. Another client had pulled out, this time one of the company's biggest accounts. Someone had leaked internal memos showing how Greg manipulated the risk profile to inflate returns. Everyone was whispering. Some were packing up their desks. Greg was nowhere to be seen. An hour later, I was called into the executive boardroom. The blinds were down. The room was silent. Greg sat at the head of the table looking like he hadn't slept in days. He gestured for me to sit. One of the board members asked me to explain what I knew about a particular file on the server, the one I had planted. I clicked through each screen calmly, showing access logs that led directly to Trent's device. Greg's hands trembled. Trent was called in 5 minutes later. His face turned pale when he saw the projection. He denied everything, then accused me of falsifying evidence. The board asked me to step outside. I left without a word. As I walked past Greg's office, I saw Lana inside, pacing, screaming into her phone. Bryce stood behind her with his arms crossed, watching the street below. When he noticed me, he didn't flinch, just stared, like he knew the storm wasn't over yet. I took the elevator down to the parking garage, climbed into my car, and gripped the wheel until my fingers went numb. I wasn't finished. Not yet. They still didn't know who I was. But they would. And when they did, I wanted it to hit like thunder. The following week felt like I was walking through a collapsing house, one floor at a time. Every morning, more clients pulled their accounts. More executives stopped smiling in the hallways. Greg had gone from king to cornered rat, barking orders, firing questions at everyone but himself. His office door stayed shut, but you could hear him yelling through the glass. Every time he passed my desk, he gave me this nod like I was still his golden hire. I nodded back, smiling just enough to look loyal. Trent stopped showing up entirely. Word spread he'd been suspended pending an internal investigation. I acted surprised, even concerned, but I was the one who planted the breadcrumbs that led them to his laptop. The board still didn't know the full story, though. That would come later. I needed them desperate first. I needed Greg to feel what it was like to lose control piece by piece. Meanwhile, Bryce was hovering. He started showing up wherever I was. Break room, lobby, parking lot. Always with some random excuse. Forgot my keys. Or thought you were someone else. But the third time, I caught him staring at the screen on my phone. He saw a text from Mason that said, "Grandma's recovering. Don't worry about the bill." He didn't say anything right then, just looked back up at me and left. That same night, Bryce messaged me. Not from his work account, but from a personal email. It said, "Can we talk off the record?" No subject line. No context. I didn't respond. Instead, I used his message to confirm something I'd already started to suspect. He knew more than he let on. I checked the logs. Bryce had accessed company audit files 2 days before they officially launched the investigation. He wasn't just floating through the chaos. He was trying to track the source. That Saturday, Greg invited the remaining leadership to a reputation recovery retreat at a private ranch outside the city. The kind of place where executives pretend they care about integrity while sipping bourbon under string lights. I didn't want to go, but then I saw Mason's text again about Grandma's surgery and remembered why I started all of this in the first place. I packed a bag, drove out there, and walked into a room full of people pretending the ship wasn't sinking. The ranch was massive, fake rustic. There were catered meals, a private chef, and a bonfire surrounded by folding chairs worth more than my apartment. Greg made a speech that was half corporate nonsense, half weird sermon about family values and second chances. I watched him closely. His hands were shaking. His voice cracked once. Nobody else noticed, but I did. After dinner, Bryce cornered me near the fire pit. He held out his phone and showed me a photo. 2 boys on a beach. One looked exactly like Mason at 8. The other was me. I hadn't seen that picture in over a decade. It had been torn up at the airport. Bryce said, "I found this hidden in one of Greg's desk drawers when I was 14. He told me those boys didn't exist anymore." I didn't know what to say. My chest tightened. He continued, "He told us you both died in a car accident. Said you and your mom were gone. That's what we believed." I didn't respond. I couldn't. He lowered his voice. "But I remember the airport. I was there. I remember Mason crying. I just didn't know it meant something real. For a second, I wanted to punch him, but something about his face stopped me. There was guilt there, real guilt, and not the polished kind. He asked me if Mason was okay. I told him the truth. No, he's not. And neither am I. Later that night, I got a message from Greg asking me to meet him at the stables. I figured it was another desperate attempt to assert control, but I went anyway. He was there, alone, standing beside a horse he clearly didn't know how to saddle. When I approached, he didn't turn. He just said, "I know who you are now." My throat tightened, but I said nothing. He turned to face me, and there was no smugness left. Just a man who had finally realized the walls were closing in. "You're Eli," he said. "But you used to be someone else." I asked him to say it. He didn't at first. Then finally, he said my real name, Caleb. It felt like a slap and a confession at the same time. He started talking fast, trying to justify everything. Said he was trapped, said Lana's father offered him a way out. That walking away was the only option he had. I reminded him that Mason was 8, that he pushed him onto the floor and let Lana steal his game sphere. Greg had the nerve to say, "I thought I could build something better." I told him the truth. He didn't build anything. He stole it. And now it was all crumbling. He begged me not to go public. Said it would ruin everyone, not just him. I pulled out my phone and played a recording of him from a recent meeting. One where he openly joked about manipulating client risk profiles to inflate returns. His face went gray. "That's not admissible," he said. "Not in court." I smiled. "Good thing I'm not suing you. I'm burning you down in the court of reputation." Back at the ranch house, I uploaded the final file. It included proof of offshore laundering, unreported vendor payouts, and tax fraud stretching back 8 years. I sent it to the board. I also CC'd a few journalists I knew would love the story. The subject line was simple: legacy. The next morning, Greg was gone. Didn't say goodbye. Didn't try to run damage control. Just left. Packed out before breakfast. Someone said he flew to a private airport. Someone else said Lana had finally left him and taken Bryce with her. Trent was still nowhere to be found. The board sent a company-wide email by noon. Greg was out. Effective immediately. I left the ranch an hour later. On the drive back to the city, I called Mason, told him it was done. I could hear the relief in his voice, mixed with something else. Silence. He asked, "So what now?" And I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that Greg finally saw us. Not as shadows or ghosts or mistakes. He saw us as the truth he couldn't bury. But what I didn't expect came the next day. Bryce texted again. Just 2 words. "We need to talk." And attached was a PDF titled, "Payment Funnel Breakdown. Internal Use Only." It was from Greg's private folder. I opened it, and my jaw clenched. The numbers weren't just tied to Greg. They linked back to Bryce. And they showed something I hadn't planned for. Bryce had been running his own scam behind Greg's back. A separate pipeline. Crypto, NFTs, overseas transfers. Tens of thousands rerouted through ghost accounts. And now he wanted to confess. I stared at the file for a long time. Then I wrote one sentence back. "You're just like him." And hit send. I thought that sending Bryce that one sentence would be the end of it. I figured he'd disappear, just like his father had, quiet, shamefaced, tail between his legs. But instead, he doubled down. The very next day, I got a call from a blocked number. I didn't answer, but then a voicemail came through. It was Bryce. His voice was tight, fast, like he hadn't slept. He said he wanted to meet. Said he had something I needed to hear before I did something I'd regret. I should have deleted the message. I should have walked away. But I didn't. We met at a downtown park just after dusk, a place empty enough to keep our voices low but public enough that neither of us would try anything stupid. Bryce looked worse than the last time I'd seen him. Hair messy, shirt wrinkled, dark rings under his eyes. I didn't say anything. Just waited. He sat down on the bench like his legs were about to give out. He started talking without looking at me. Told me that what I saw in that file was real, but it wasn't about greed. Said it was about insurance. That he knew his father had secrets and started tracing them when he was 19. Found pieces of the fraud. Confronted Greg once. Was told, in no uncertain terms, that if he ever breathed a word, his life would be over. Greg had resources, connections, influence. So Bryce did what he thought would protect himself. He copied everything. And yeah, he siphoned money. But not for yachts or watches. He said he used it to build a separate safety net. One Greg couldn't touch. "I never wanted to be like him," he said. "But I didn't want to be left with nothing either." I asked him why he sent the file to me. Why not the board? The press? The police? He looked at me for the first time that night, and what I saw in his eyes wasn't fear. It was something more dangerous. "Hope," he said, Because you already started the fire. I thought maybe you could burn the rest of it down. I left him on that bench without saying a word. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because of guilt. Not even because of the confession. But because I knew what had to happen next. Bryce wanted me to clean up the mess he helped create. He wanted redemption without responsibility. But that wasn't justice. That was cowardice. And I wasn't finished. Not yet. The next morning, I packaged everything. Bryce's documents, Greg's offshore accounts, Trent's manipulation of client data, and every internal memo I had collected in the past 2 months. I wrote a letter to the Texas Financial Ethics Commission, another to the IRS, and a third to a journalist I knew from my college days, someone who'd been waiting for a story like this to fall into her lap. Then I uploaded the entire archive to a private server and set a timed link. 48 hours. 1 click. No going back. But just when I thought it would all fall quietly into place, I got a call I never expected. It was from Lana. I didn't answer at first. Let it go to voicemail. But then I saw a text come through. Just 2 words. He's gone. I called her back. She was crying. Or maybe pretending to cry. I could never tell with her. She said Greg had been found in a motel outside Houston. Pills. Whiskey. No note. Just a copy of the company's last quarterly report and a torn photograph in his wallet. The same beach photo Bryce had shown me. Except this one hadn't been hidden. He'd been carrying it all along. For a moment, I didn't say anything. My hand gripped the phone so tightly it started shaking. Lana asked if I was happy. She said, "You destroyed him. Are you proud of that?" I told her that Greg destroyed himself. That all I did was show people the truth. She hung up without another word. I sat there, alone in my apartment, and I didn't know what to feel. For weeks, revenge had been my heartbeat. My reason to wake up. My purpose. Now the target was gone. The monster I'd been chasing wasn't around to see the wreckage. And somehow, that felt worse. Because it meant I didn't get to watch him live with it. I didn't get to see him suffer. He took the coward's way out and left the rest of us to clean up the damage. 2 days later, the story broke. It was everywhere. Major news outlets, financial blogs, social media threads full of disbelief and outrage. Greg's face was plastered next to words like fraud, cover-up, betrayal. Trent's name came up too. Bryce's didn't, not yet. But I knew it would eventually. He wasn't innocent, and he wouldn't stay hidden for long. The web was too wide now. The walls were closing in on everyone. Then came the final twist. A week after the news exploded, Mason found a letter in our mailbox. No stamp, no return address, just folded paper and a flash drive taped to the inside. The letter was from Greg. Typed, not handwritten. Maybe that was his final cowardice. Or maybe he didn't want his handwriting traced. It said that he never stopped thinking about us. That the decision to walk away haunted him more than he ever admitted. That he hated himself for what he did, but couldn't stop chasing a life that made him feel powerful. He ended it by saying we were better than he ever deserved. And that he hoped, somehow, we could live without the weight he carried. The flash drive contained one thing, a video. Greg, sitting in a dim hotel room, speaking straight into the camera, confessing everything. Not just the fraud, the abandonment, the airport, Mason's tears, my silence. He said he didn't expect forgiveness. Just wanted the truth to live somewhere other than in his own head. We didn't show it to anyone. We kept it locked away. A month passed. The investigation started. The lawsuits followed. The company was gutted. Trent vanished. Bryce deleted every social profile he had and reportedly left the country. Lana filed for bankruptcy. All the people who watched Greg rise now turned their backs. He wasn't a legacy. He was a cautionary tale. And Mason and I? We went home. Our grandmother was healing. Mason finished his semester strong. I got a new job offer, this time under my real name. No more aliases. No more hiding. People still ask if it was worth it. If revenge gave me what I wanted. The truth? Not really. It didn't fix the past. It didn't bring back our mother or erase the trauma. But it ended the silence. It shattered the illusion that we didn't matter. And that means something. Sometimes justice doesn't feel like a victory. Sometimes it feels like silence where there used to be screams. And maybe that's enough.